Welcome to a new episode of First Laps from the Suzuka paddock after the first two practice sessions for the Japanese Grand Prix. And that also means the first real taste for drivers of the Suzuka circuit, the iconic Suzuka circuit with the new cars and therefore the new regulations. Everyone knew from the get-go that it would be different. The initial feedback from drivers is that for sure it is different. They are relatively positive about the FIA intervention for qualifying, saying, yeah, it should lead to a bit less super clipping, less lift and coast, but less already means that there is still super clipping going on, and you can, first of all, see that when you're trackside, and secondly, you can see that when you look into the GPS data after practice. You can see it at several places, and one of them is the long straight before 130R. Of course, one of the most iconic corners, but you can see drivers super clipping before they get to the corner, and you see that in the speed profiles, they're losing top speed while they are still full throttle before they get to 130R. Lewis Hamilton said, yeah, the super clipping bit before 130R is definitely not great. He said it's one of the bits of the regulations that I don't like, because he's one of the drivers that is actually quite positive about the racing. Some drivers, I have to say most drivers, find the racing too artificial and say, well, it's yo-yo racing. Lewis Hamilton said, well, the racing makes me feel like I'm in karting a bit, so that's positive. But for sure, the super clipping and also super clipping here before 130R, it's not positive. And Carlos Sainz said it's better than what it would have been without the FIA intervention, but it's still not how Formula One should be. Super clipping is not the only aspect. Another aspect can be seen in the S's, so in the first sector of this phenomenal racetrack. Because Carlos Sainz explained in the media pen, actually on the other side of the camera, he said in the S's we are basically not deploying electrical energy. And that's because, of course, all these cars are energy poor, so they want to deploy the energy they've got on the straights and not in the S's. So that's why Carlos Sainz said most of us, it still differs a little bit per team and per driver, but he said most of us, we are just doing the S's with the internal combustion engine without deploying any electrical energy. And he said that feels a little bit weird and makes the S's, from a driver's point of view, a little bit different from what they have been in years before. So yes, it could have been worse without the FIA intervention for qualifying, but still Suzuka, from a driver's experience, is a little bit different from what it has been in, let's say, the ground effect era. Let's look at the competitive picture then after practice. And yeah, McLaren topping the timesheets, but they say we are clearly not the favorite. Andrea Stella already said that after FP1, when he was in the team principals press conference, he said, yes, our times are looking quite okay, but basically our performance is where we expected it to be, and Mercedes is probably having quite a lot of pace in hand. He said if you look at the mini sectors, you can already see that. And if you look at the GPS data, that's even more the case. So always a lot of question marks after Friday practice, but this year with the deployment even more than ever before. And that makes it kind of pointless to look at individual lap times. Makes it a lot more representative to look at the long runs. And in the long runs, Mercedes was definitely still the benchmark. And also by some margin, we can actually show a graphic from our data partner Pacetech. And that graphic shows that Mercedes was by far the quickest in the longer runs on Friday. And that the margin was still more than 6/10, 6.5 tenths actually, to the first non-Mercedes driver. And as we have seen in the previous two race weekends, that's still Ferrari. But the difference is that McLaren is getting closer to Ferrari. And that's in line with the feeling that McLaren team principal Stella had. Because he said, we still lack on the chassis side. We need to come up with updates. We need to come with improvements. They already will do that in Miami. They will use the brake for what could be quite a significant package in Miami. But he said on the power unit side, we are learning more and more. We are working together with HPP. And the deficit we have on the PU side compared to the factory team is not as big as it has been in, let's say, Melbourne. So yes, Mercedes still very much the benchmark in the long runs. Ferrari some way back the second force, and then McLaren is relatively close to that. So that's kind of the picture after the Friday action here at Suzuka. One team that's further back and also significantly further back is Red Bull Racing. Again, not the smoothest start to the weekend so far. Red Bull has brought several upgrades here for the RB22. A lot of that is linked to the side pods. The side pod inlets are different. The side pods and the engine cover are different. Linked to that, also some parts of the floor are different. But it has not had the desired effect so far, especially not on the car balance that Max Verstappen has been struggling with. Max said, yeah, car balance was a bit all over the place, and he said, I felt two very extremes. In the first practice session, he had a lot of understeer. Then they kind of tried to counter that, but then it turned into a lot of oversteer. So he clearly didn't find the sweet spot and didn't get the car to his liking. Especially painful in the S's. Max said we're losing so much there. And that's not just power unit, that's not just internal combustion engine, but that's for a really, really significant part, car balance. And that car balance is definitely not where it should be. We have seen that before with Red Bull in the past, and usually they turned the car upside down, as Max would call that, and then got it in the right window just before Parc Fermé and therefore just before qualifying. But Max said this time is different, and this is not an easy fix. It's more fundamental, according to him. And that was kind of echoed by team principal Laurent Mekies. Laurent Mekies kind of admitted there are still some areas of this year's car that we don't quite understand. And that has been visible in China, where Red Bull struggled massively to get the car balance in a good place. And it has been visible again here so far today. But Red Bull say, well, the two problems we have are not related, and they're basically completely different, also completely different type of circuit. Usually Red Bulls struggle the most in low-speed corners, but today Max Verstappen said it's all the medium speed and the high speed where we are losing out and where we are bleeding. That was his literal quote. So Red Bull still has a lot of work to do before qualifying, but the big question is, can they actually solve it? The answer is probably no, because even in the long run they were still behind Alpine and Haas. So they are really looking forward to the break to hopefully come up with some bigger changes ahead of Miami. One other team and one PU manufacturer that's also really looking ahead to the break and to make full use of that is Aston Martin together with Honda. Of course, Honda's home weekend, you can see it in the grandstand, still a lot of green, a lot of support for Honda, which is great to see. But we all know the reality of this moment, and that's a rather painful one. The reality is that kind of Adrian Newey already in Melbourne came up with some, it was not just expectation management, but also some really interesting quotes. A lot of that was linked to the battery, but Adrian Newey also said we only found out in November 2025 what the current state of Honda's F1 project is. And that current state is completely different from what it has been in the past in the glory years together with Red Bull. Because, of course, Honda pulled out of F1 officially at the end of 2021. Then a lot of people were kind of reallocated to different parts of the broader company. So that's car production, motorbikes, even reusable rockets and solar panels. And Adrian Newey joked a little bit about solar panels in Melbourne. So that means that they had to basically start from scratch again to build the project for Aston Martin. And that means that the Honda's F1 project cannot be compared to what it was in the title-winning years with Max Verstappen. But the interesting bit is that Adrian Newey in Melbourne said, well, we only found out about their current state in November 2025. And that sounded extremely strange, because it would basically mean that when they signed the deal back in 2023, they didn't fully know what they signed up for. So that's the strange bit. Today I put that to Watanabe-san in the team principal press conference. Watanabe-san is the HRC president. And he said, well, part of this is a misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding is basically twofold. One element is the expectations from the outside world. Honda said they were way too high because people easily thought, okay, you got Newey, you got Honda, you got a brand new factory, so all the ingredients for success are there. That's probably true, but it's a really long-term project. And given what I just said about Honda, it's definitely not for the short term. Second part is that after all those people basically left the F1 project, Honda had to build it again, but building it again took a lot longer than what they anticipated. And that's another part of the misunderstanding, because that's, of course, something that Aston Martin could not know in May 2023 when the deal was announced, because this happened after it. So the reality is a little bit more nuanced maybe than what people thought after those Adrian Newey quotes in Melbourne. A final aspect related to Honda is that, of course, they are suffering from the vibrations damaging the battery. And today Honda admitted that the vibrations could not be seen fully on the dyno. Having said that, well, they could see it, but they thought it would be acceptable. They thought the vibrations were like on an acceptable level until they put the power unit into the Aston Martin chassis, and then it became clear to everyone, and also pretty quickly, that it was definitely not at an acceptable level. So that's also part of the reason why Honda is struggling so much, that they couldn't foresee these problems based on the dyno running. They only found out on track, and now they have a really, really, really steep learning curve ahead of them. First of all, with reliability, then finding pure performance, which you can do with the duo system, but it's not going to be a quick fix at all. It's not going to be a quick fix for this weekend. This weekend will continue tomorrow with qualifying. After qualifying, we'll be back with a new episode of First Laps. So for now, thanks a lot for watching, and hope to see you again tomorrow.